Just waiting for more people to come in. It's great. Good evening. My name is Kathy Betcher. Welcome to the Wellesley Free Library on this beautiful summer night. It's just glorious. Take a moment, if you have electronic devices with you, turn them off, silence. We are also joined tonight by the Wellesley Cable Station. They are recording via our cameras in 4 parts of the room, and if there's any Q&A at the end of our program tonight, know that that will be recorded as always, as usual. As always, there's information about upcoming programs here in the library during the summer months. Sign up for our e-newsletter if you would like. Tonight's performance, and give us feedback too. The evaluation forms are out there. They're short and sweet, so if you haven't filled one out in a bit, we've shortened them. So give us some feedback. We love it. Tonight's performance is generously sponsored by the Friends of the Wellesley Free Libraries. If there are any friends in the libraries, I personally thank you for all the support and great work that you do. And it is their support that allows the library to offer many entertaining and educational programs for adults and children year-round. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining. And now, it is my honor to welcome our guest tonight, Benjamin Franklin.
As a young child, I decided one day that I would play hooky from school. I hid in the barn until the rest of the family had gone, and then I came out and I began to play. A man started walking down the road towards me, and I grew concerned because I thought it might be the truant officer and that I would be in great trouble with my parents and the school. He was walking along, he had an axe upon his shoulder, and he called out to me very brightly and cheerily, called me over, patted me on the head, told me what a wonderful young man I was and how smart and intelligent I was. And he looked around all the while he's complimenting me. And he noticed my father's grindstone outside the barn. He asked if I was a clever enough boy to be able to sharpen his axe. I assured him that I was. I took his axe, I got the grindstone going, and I began to put an edge on it. All the while he is telling me how wonderful I am, how intelligent I am, what a fine young lad I am. The moment I was done sharpening his axe, he picked me up by the scruff of the neck, shook me a few times, and told me I had better get to school right away, and if he ever saw me out of school, he would report me to both my parents and the truant officer. He dropped me on the ground, kicked me in the seat of my pants, and off I went to school. I tell you that story because from that day to this day, whenever anyone uses flowery, complimentary language, I always say, there is a man with an axe to grind. I tell you that because I'm about to give you flowery, complimentary language. I want to thank you for your amazing intelligence at coming out this evening and listening to me talk about my life. I love that you've come to a library. I love libraries. A rather famous story is a certain town in Massachusetts changed its name to my last name. And after they had done so, they wrote to me and asked me if I would be generous enough to donate a bell for the bell tower that they had just put up. Imagine their excitement when a large crate arrived from Benjamin Franklin. And when they opened it, they discovered it was full of books, with a note from me that assured them that good sense was better than good sound. So I'm delighted that you're here at the library. I'd love to share a bit of my life with you and what an adventure my life has been. I was born not so very far from here, Boston, Massachusetts, just across the street from the Old South Church. I come from an extremely large family, 17 children. Yes, I say my poor mother as well, absolutely. 17 of us, and in those days, my father was a soap and candle maker, as well as a reverend at the church across the street, a deacon, I should say. And in those days, we believed in something called tithing, where you would give 10% of your worldly goods to the church. And since I was the 10th son born in my family, my father decided I should be donated to the church, and it was planned I should become a minister. Two things changed my father's mind. The first was he looked around Boston. So many ministers were wearing old ragged clothes and boots that were worn out. The other thing that changed my father's mind was me. I had what we might have called at the time a fresh mouth. We used to have evening meals together, our entire family. My father would say a very long, long prayer over our evening meal. One day, we got a load of salted fish, a few barrels of salted fish, and I merely suggested to my father that if he prayed over the fish now, we could save so much time at dinner. My father decided I was not for the ministry. He took me to work with him, making soap and candles. I hated it. Always had hated the feel of tallow, and the smells were horrible. No, I wanted to go to sea, but I had an older brother who had gone to sea and had been lost at sea and never returned. So my parents didn't like that idea very much. About that time, though, my brother James came back from England to set up a print shop. And it was decided that I would become James's apprentice. I would learn the craft of printing from him. I signed on as an apprentice till I was 21 years of age. I would learn the craft, I would get a small amount of money, and then eventually I would be able to open up my own print shop. And that suited me just fine. I loved working in the print shop. I did all the duties that were required of me. I mixed the ink, I set the print. We made everything you can imagine, broadsides and pamphlets, the occasional book, although those were rare and quite expensive. My brother printed a newspaper. It was a unique newspaper for the time. Most newspapers just reprinted news from England. My brother's paper did that, but we also had original articles that we included. The New England Current. And it was quite successful for its time. I knew, though, that if I was to get anywhere in life, that I would have to further my education on my own. So each and every evening, after we locked up the print shop, I would meet a fellow apprentice from one of the different shops around Boston. And they would have borrowed a book from their master's shelf. They would slip it to me. I would go home. I would read all night long, late into the next morning, and then I would be back on that same corner the next day, hand back the book, and it was back on the master's shelf before that master knew that anything was missing. I educated myself in that fashion. I have always said that education is the best investment. But I wanted to do more than just work as an apprentice at the print shop. I wanted to write. I thought I could be a good writer. And so I suggested to my brother James that I should write something for the newspaper. Those of you that have siblings know how that idea went over. My brother thought it was a terrible idea. That's ridiculous. So I decided I would have to pretend to be someone else in order to be printed in the newspaper. I took it in my head to become a middle-aged widow woman from mid-Massachusetts named Silence Dogood. And I wrote quite a letter to the New England Current. It started off something like this. Dear Sir, it may not be improper to inform you and your readers that I intend once a fortnight to enlighten them with stories of my life. Sincerely, Silence Dogood. I wrote up the letter. I slipped it under the door before anyone got to the print shop. I waited next morning while my brother came with the keys and his friends. He opened up the door, picked up the mail, and I watched. as he found Silence Dogood's letter, and I saw him smile and begin to chuckle a little bit, and he called over his friends, and they laughed over the letter. They printed that letter. They printed 14 letters from Silence Dogood. The New England Courant had never been so popular as when people bought it to read what Silence Dogood was up to. Well, you can imagine what happened. My brother James discovered that I was Silence Dogood. We had a terrible fight. We came to physical blows over it. Took us many, many years to repair things between ourselves. But about that time, James had bigger worries. He was thrown in jail. The Puritans, who were in charge in Boston at the time, didn't like some of the information that was put in the New England Courant. They freed my brother from prison with the understanding that he was not allowed to be the publisher of a newspaper in Massachusetts ever again. My brother thought he saw a way around this. He would simply make me the publisher of the New England Courant, and he could keep on running in that way. But there was a problem, though. An apprentice is not allowed to own a business. My brother had to release me from my apprenticeship in order to make me the publisher. And once he released me, I felt it was time to branch out on my own and go exploring in my own life and see what adventures awaited me. I packed up everything I had in the world, every scrap of everything, and I put them in bags and boxes. I strapped them all over my body, and I took a ship and I sailed south. And I got off that ship in New York Harbor, and I looked at the great city of New York spread out in front of me. And I got back on that ship and went to Philadelphia instead. That seemed to suit me a little better. I got off at the pier and walked down Market Street, and I loved Philadelphia from the moment that I saw it. There was a baker selling some rolls, and they smelled so wonderful. I went in and bought a few rolls. There's some children outside of the bake shop. I shared my bread with them. And there I am, Benjamin Franklin, everything I own in the world strapped onto me, juggling the rolls because they are so warm in my hands, and walking down Market Street. I was quite a sight. A young woman came out on her porch. She was sweeping, and she looked, and there came Benjamin Franklin, jingling and jangling and juggling rolls, and she pointed at me and laughed and laughed and laughed. But you know, the last laugh was on me because I married her. Her name was Deborah Reed, and not long after I moved to Philadelphia, I became a lodger in their home, and Deborah and I, over time, fell in love. I went to work with a partner at a print shop, but he wasn't a very good partner. But I became friends with the then governor of the colony of Pennsylvania, and he came up with a wonderful idea. He had money in England. He would send me with a letter of credit, and I would go and buy materials to set up a print shop of our own. I would work it. He would be my silent partner. I thought that was a wonderful idea. I went back to Boston, made amends with my family, and continued to England. And in England, I walked in and I said, "Good morning, sir. My name is Benjamin Franklin. I have this letter of credit from the governor of the great colony of Pennsylvania." "Why are you smiling, sir? Why are you chuckling, sir?" "The governor has no money in this. The governor owes money to this bank." Well, there I was, stuck in London without a sou to my name. But you know, in the long run, as things often did for me in my life, it worked out well. Because in England, I went to work, of course, in a print shop. I learned something called copper plate engraving. And years later, when a group of colonies decided that they should become a nation and they needed to print money, that copper plate engraving knowledge served me and that new nation very, very well. But while I was in London, I earned money any way I could. I worked in a print shop. But now we come to the part where you get to have participation in my life. when I was in London, what else did I do to raise money? Guessing is allowed. Say it again.
Did you write?
Did I write? I did do a bit of writing at the print shop, but not too much. Good guess, though. Thank you for playing. I'm delighted that you're here.
Inventing.
Say again?
Inventing.
Inventing. Thank you for knowing a bit about my life. Wrong. It was a good guess, though. A very good guess. Someone else? Yes.
Acting.
Acting. Ben Franklin as an actor. What a wonderful idea. No. No. No.
Juggling bread?
Juggling. Something more absurd than juggling. Tutor. No, the tutors were in London a long time before I was there. How dare you, madam? How dare? No, I wasn't a tutor. No. I gave swimming demonstrations. I'm sorry, did he say he gave swimming demonstrations? I gave swimming demonstrations. I love to swim ever since I was a young child. And while I was in London, I would put out a hat, jump into the Thames River, and demonstrate fancy swimming. One arm in the air, one leg in the air, an arm and a leg in the air, and people would throw coins into my hat. I also was, I suppose I was a bit of a tutor. I gave swimming lessons as well. Well, eventually I earned enough money to leave London, come back to Philadelphia, marry that girl that had laughed at me, and I bought my own print shop. And along with my wonderful Debbie, we set up shop. And I worked very, very hard at my print shop. I would get there early in the morning before anyone else was awake, and I would light every single candle in my shop so that people on their way to their work would see everything lit and think, oh, Ben Franklin, his shop is so busy. He's so successful. I would never send my apprentices down to the docks to get my supplies. I would always go myself. I would pick up the supplies in a wheelbarrow, and then I would take the long way back to my shop to good morning to you, to say good morning to as many people as I could. I wanted them to see that Benjamin Franklin was hardworking and industrious. Well, it apparently worked. My shop became extremely successful. We printed a wonderful newspaper in Philadelphia. We printed the occasional book. We printed broadsides. We were very, very busy. I also printed something that was quite common in the colonies during my day. A very simple, tiny little book called an almanac. But if you were alive during my life, an almanac had so much important information in it. It would tell you when the sun would rise and set on a particular day, when you might go ahead and plant crops, when the rainy season was supposed to begin. The almanac that we printed was written by a man named Richard Saunders, and so we called it Poor Richard's Almanac. It was an almanac like many others that were around at the time, but it was popular because we peppered in little colloquial sayings throughout the almanac. Some of them were original, and some of them had been around for quite some time, and some of them have lasted quite a few centuries. When the well is dry, we know the worth of water. 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man
Healthy, wealthy, and wise.
or extremely boring. Either of those is appropriate, yes. All would live long, but none would grow old. And God helps those who help themselves. Oh, and a penny saved is a
Penny earned.
In a colonial home, most colonial homes, you would only find 2 books. One was the Bible, and the other was the current almanac. Well, my print shop was very successful. And since you already know that I like to write under fake names, it won't surprise you that I was Richard Saunders. To make my newspaper successful, I would write letters to the editor pretending to be someone else. I would frequently have arguments with myself about how terrible my newspaper was. Sometimes I would print obituaries of other printers in town who were not dead at the time, and they would get angry and write me, and I would write them back. All of this helped the circulation of my newspaper. It did quite well. Eventually, I decided I could retire very early in life. Well, early back then, I suppose, in my 50s. Kept some apprentices at the print shop, but now I could pursue the other things that mattered to me in life. One of the things I did while I was a printer in Philadelphia is I believed in giving back to the community that had given so much to me. I joined with a group of fellow workers. We called ourselves the Leather Apron Club. We were all humble workers. We were sometimes called the Junto. And we would get together and we would decide how to better ourselves and better our communities. We hired people to sweep the streets, to improve the lighting on the streets, to keep an eye on our shops at night. With the help of that group and other groups, I founded the first volunteer fire department in the United States, the first public lending library, the first public hospital, things like that, because I believe strongly in giving back to the community that had given me so very much. But in my retirement, I could pursue my passion. And one of my passions was indeed inventing things. I loved science. It had always fascinated me since I was a young boy. I used to swim in Jamaica Pond. And when I swam in Jamaica Pond in Boston, I would look along the edge of the pond and I would see that there were tadpoles zipping along the pond. And I thought, if only my hands and feet were webbed like theirs, I could zip around the pond too. And so I took 2 planks and I whittled them down, attached them to my hands and another pair to my feet, and I became the fastest swimmer in the pond. You know I loved kites. I always have. I love the way that they catch the wind and pull so strongly, and I thought, what if I used the kite to try and get me from one side of the pond to the other? So on a windy day, I got the kite up and running. I tied it around my waist. I jumped in the pond, and sure enough, I zipped straight across that pond. Like many experiments, it didn't go perfectly. In those days, we swam without any clothing on. So there I was on the far side of the pond with the kite, and my clothes were back on the other side of the pond. The wind wouldn't change direction, so I had to walk all the way around the pond to my clothes. Thank God for the kite. That's all I'll say about that. When I grew up, whenever I saw anything that caused an irritation or a problem, I tried to think of ways to improve it. Fireplaces, as an example. Fireplaces were against an exterior wall, and the flue went up the chimney to the outside. I thought that wasn't very efficient. Most of the heat was going to the outside and not into the room. So I invented a stove, simply an iron tube, and we would use a firebox in the room, and the heat would dispel more evenly. We called it, humbly, the Franklin stove. It was a terrible invention, and after that, many people did much better than I did with the Franklin stove. But it was a very good start. I used to see objects that were up high on a shelf, and I made an invention which is used to this very day. I'm going to guess that a few of you probably still use this. I believe the technical term these days is a grabber. I called it a mechanical arm. There was a book up on a high shelf. I merely used this and got the book, and it could come right down to me. I invented a step ladder that turned into a small chair so you could go up and get your book and sit right down and read it. Thomas Jefferson loved that and improved on that idea over time. I invented the first catheter used in the United States. No, madam, I won't be demonstrating it. Thank you for asking. My brother James suffered, though, terribly with his kidneys, and he needed that. And so I invented some mechanical, flexible tubes that he could utilize. And of course, I hated carrying around 2 pairs of glasses, a pair to see things up close and a pair to see things far away. So I went to a glazier, I had him cut my 2 pairs of glasses, the lenses in half, and I created the bifocals, which are to this day still being used. We also had a terrible mail system in the colonies. And I was approached by England, could I figure out the best way to let the mail system work? Back in those days, you would write 5 letters, and you would hand them out to people that were heading in the right direction, and you would hope that one copy of the letter might get to the right person. But I came up with a method of getting couriers going along the shortest track possible. To do that, I had to ride and measure all up and down the eastern seaboard. I had a little cart with a wheel, and every so often that wheel would click, and that would be 1 mile. It's called an odometer. I think you still use those to this very day. I'm perhaps, however, best known for my experiments with electricity. I loved electricity. It absolutely fascinated me. Many of the terms that you were brought up with using electricity, I actually invented. Positive and negative charges, the ideas of a circuit. I had batteries in my home, Leyden jars, which could hold a charge and give out small shocks. I decided one day, since electricity seemed to be light and heat, and it reminded me of a fire, I decided one day I would try to cook using electricity. I invited my friends over, and I was going to cook a turkey. I had my project set up. I had a turkey ready to try to cook through the use of electricity. I was, however, not paying proper attention at the proper time and put my hand in the wrong place and zap! Electrocuted myself, fell to the ground, was unconscious for 5 minutes. There were those who were there that day that still say a turkey was indeed cooked at Benjamin Franklin's that particular evening. But my most famous electrical experiment involved a kite. You see, in those days, we didn't know what lightning was. People thought it was gods up in the heavens being angry, and they would throw down a lightning bolt at this house and skip that house, because obviously these were better people than those people. Well, I thought that was a silly idea. And the lightning bolts looked so very much like the electrical discharges I would get in my experiments. I decided I would try to prove that lightning was indeed nothing more than electricity. I waited for a good lightning storm. Along with my son, William, we got a kite flying right up into the storm. I had put a piece of metal at the very top of the kite, and I had a wire running down to the ground. There was a brass key attached to it, and we got it flying and flying. Oh, by the way, William is often showed as a small child in renderings of my kite experiment. He was 21 at the time. Don't believe any of those paintings. We got that going, and I watched as lightning bolt after lightning bolt after lightning bolt struck that kite, and absolutely nothing was happening. I'm not quite sure what I expected. But I looked at that brass key, and then I did a very foolish thing. People that know science better than I do will tell you what I did could have easily killed me. I took the knuckle of my hand and I held it near that brass key. And when I did small discharges of electricity, just like the ones I had seen in my experiments at home, leapt from the key to my hand. I wrote up that experiment, and I wrote an invention to go with it. What if we applied that idea to what was going on in the world around us? What if we took an iron rod and attached it to the side of a house, very high, and had a wire running into the ground, because electricity likes to go to ground? Wouldn't that help save the thousands, millions of homes that were destroyed by lightning every year? I published that work, and indeed, to this very day, lightning rods save many, many homes. It was because of that experiment and my invention of the lightning rod that a humble New Englander with just a second-grade education became Dr. Benjamin Franklin, thanks to a group of scientists in Edinburgh and then later in London. I, of course, use the title doctor every chance I get. But now my thoughts turned from those kinds of experiments to a greater experiment. You see, we had been run by England for quite some time, and it was frustrating for us to be in colonies and have no say in Parliament. And we were being taxed heavily because of our natural resources to pay for the work that England was doing elsewhere in the world. I was sent by my colony, Pennsylvania, to London to meet with people and argue with them and try to explain that the colonies should have a say in how they were governed. I was mildly successful. Many of the Stamp Acts and Townshend Acts were reduced for a period of time. I was approached by other colonies in America, and they also asked me if I would speak on their behalf. I spent 10 years in London, appearing at the homes of members of Parliament, arguing that these colonies of ours should have a say in how they were governed. I had some mixed results, but as we know, things grew more and more difficult for the people back here in the colonies. Finally, some letters came into my possession, letters to the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, letters that explained that there would be soldiers coming to Boston, that they would forcibly put themselves in American homes, and that Americans had to fall in line to be a part of Great Britain. I knew I had to do something with those letters. I sent them to my friends in Boston. They were published in the newspaper. As you might imagine, there was a hue and cry by all colonists. We were very upset and angry that England had these warlike plans with us. But that was nothing compared to the anger in London that the letters had been leaked out. Who had done this? Who had been so traitorous? 3 men were arrested. They were sentenced to be hanged. Well, I knew I could not allow that to happen. I stepped forward and confessed it was I, Benjamin Franklin, that had come in possession of those letters and had given them to the colonists. I was bound in chains, and for 3 days in front of the Priory, the Parliament, I was railed at, called every imaginable name, insulted. The wearing of those heavy chains for 3 days broke my health. I was never quite the same after that. Eventually, it was decided that I should be expelled from England, never, ever to return. As I went to the dock to board the boat that would take me back to the colonies, 2 pieces of information reached me. First is my wonderful wife, Deborah, had passed on. The second was the news of Concord and Lexington. Shots had been fired, blood had been spilled. I came home to Philadelphia. I was asked to join with other colonies and try to make peace with England. But I knew, having spent 10 years with Parliament, that there was no chance for that. I knew we needed to separate ourselves from England. Most of the people that met with me in Independence Hall did not agree with that. Surely England would understand. We should remain Englishmen. But a few of us saw that freedom was our only opportunity to have a voice of our own. My good friend John Adams was constantly asking that we have an open discussion about the idea of independence, but they would never give him a chance. Franklin, he said, what is wrong with them? It has been over a year since Concord and Lexington. Why don't they listen to me? Why won't they give my proposals of independence so much as the courtesy of an open debate? John, I said, it's easy. You're obnoxious and disliked. He was. I decided that the only way we could ever have the question of independence on the table openly was for another colony to suggest it. But throughout my life, I never believed in directly doing things. My method, Benjamin Franklin's method, was to talk with a person and get that person to come to the conclusion that I hoped they would get to. So I took a little walk with Richard Henry Lee of Virginia. I explained our problem to him at length, and he came up with the brilliant and original idea that Virginia should propose a discussion on the question of independence. That's just what we did. And argue we did. Finally, it was decided we needed a document, some kind of an outline that we could utilize. But we would surely need the help of another powerful nation if we were to have our independence. Myself, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Messrs. Livingston and Morris all worked on crafting that document. It was mostly Tom Jefferson. It was a brilliant, brilliant document. I'm honored to have had a say in the making of some of it. But we ran into a serious problem. The Southern states didn't like what had been written in the original Declaration of Independence. You see, that included some language that suggested that all people in this group of colonies would be free. And of course, the Southern states valued slavery tremendously. We came to an impasse. I finally said, John, we don't have a choice. The slavery clause has to be eliminated. It's a luxury that we cannot afford. A luxury, Adams said. A luxury. 1 million souls in chains, and Dr. Franklin calls it a luxury. You forget yourself, sir, I said. I founded the first anti-slavery group on this continent. The question here is independence. Perhaps you have lost sight of that, but I have not. First things first. America. Well, without that, how can anything else be achieved? Mark me, Franklin, John said. We give in on the slavery issue, history will never forgive us. That's probably true, I said, but won't make a difference to us. We'll be long dead. Besides, what will history think we were? Demigods? We're men, nothing more, nothing less, trying to start a nation under odds that a kinder God would not have given us. We took the language out. The Southern states agreed, and the Declaration was signed. I remember John Hancock's large signature with a flourish as he signed it. That's so Fat George in London can read it without his glasses, he said. We all laughed at that. Hancock didn't laugh, though. He said, excuse me if I don't join in your laughter, gentlemen, but if we're arrested now, my name is the only one on the thing. We all signed, and off we went. I became busier than I had ever been in my life. I was a member of every committee you can imagine, committees of correspondence. I helped to send messages across state lines. I helped with the printing of information, with drawing out plans of communication. I was sent, of course, to France to try to convince the French king to give us money and arms and supplies. And eventually, as you know, we won our freedom. I was part of the group that signed the Treaty of Peace with England. I returned to my home in Philadelphia thinking at long last I could settle down. But my country wasn't done with me. We had a country, but we had no clue how to run it. So they had a constitutional Congress. You know what they say about Congress? One useless man is called a disgrace. 2 are called a law firm, and 3 or more become a Congress. Well, the Constitutional Congress, I am proud to say, was some of the best sleep I ever got in my life. Eventually, we had a set of rules, regulations, a way to run this country of ours, but there was once again a stalemate. There were a group of people that said, we are equal colonies, each of us should have an equal voice. And another group of people that said, no, I have more people in my colony. My colony is bigger, we should have a larger say in what is going on. I merely suggested compromise. Why don't we do both? A group that represents us by our size, a group that represents us equally, a House and a Senate. And that is how we got the Constitution passed. I had sat there for days looking at the back of George Washington's chair. There was a sun carved on it, and I couldn't figure out if it was a rising sun or a setting sun. But that day I knew it was a rising sun. I left Independence Hall and a woman said, Dr. Franklin, what sort of a government do we have? A republic, madam, if you can keep it. And keep it you have. My adventurous life ended quietly in Philadelphia. If you happen to visit me there, you'll find these words on my grave. B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here food for worms. But the work shall not be wholly lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author. I have in my life been many things. A printer, a businessman, a writer, statesman. But my proudest accomplishment is that I was Benjamin Franklin, American. I thank you for listening. Pleasure to spend some time with you. If you had any questions, I would be delighted to try and tackle them, keeping in mind I'm extremely old. Sir.
When you went to England to buy the printing equipment with a bad piece of paper, how did you amass enough money to be able to bring printing equipment back and start your own print shop in Philadelphia?
It's a fair question. I worked in a print shop in London. I also gave swimming lessons, incredibly lucrative. No, I'm only kidding. I also, once I was back in the States, I did borrow some money to open up that first print shop. But the years that I lived there and worked there the first time around, as I like to say, I worked in 2 different print shops actually in London. And did fairly well. Printers at that time, I was not an apprentice, I was a printer. I was considered a printer, so I did fairly well working for other printers at the time. But that's where I got my money. Yes. Yes?
How long did it take you to develop this character?
Let's see, I died when I was 84. 84 years. Oh, you're asking the performer. The performer. I will table that till the end of my questions and answers, all right? Thank you for that, though. I do appreciate it. Yes?
Could you tell us more about the lightning experience? What was it like being out there? Could you see the lightning in the sky hit the top of the kite and then
Yes.
spark come out down below? How long were these sparks? Could you just tell us more about what the experience was?
Absolutely. So the kite experiment, I had cooked it up a few weeks before we actually did it. And I loved the idea that we might be able to prove it was electricity. So William and I had the kite prepared. It was a simple kite. I used raw silk as the conduit, if you will. I had the metal at the top. We went out, it was fairly early evening, but it was extremely dark when we were out there. We were next to a church in Philadelphia, high on a hill, so we were even closer to this lightning storm as it rolled through. I could see lightning bolt after lightning bolt after lightning bolt striking the kite. And I expected somewhere in my imagination that the brass key would glow somehow. That was my expectation. Absolutely nothing like that happened. And it was only when I took my knuckle and put it very close to the brass key that I would get a spark about this long. But the sparks looked exactly like the ones that I got at home from my Leyden jars when I would go and connect a couple pieces of wiring to get a spark between them and that sort of thing. So that was when I made the connection about the lightning. I have always loved lightning throughout my entire life. I had a set of bells with a wire that would go outside onto the roof of my home in Philadelphia. And when a lightning storm would come and lightning would begin to strike, the bells would ring. Well, I went off to England and got a frantic letter from my wife, Debbie. How do I turn off the damn bells? So I had to send her instructions on what to do. Yes?
How did Deborah manage while you were in England for 10 years?
It's a wonderful question and something that people have long looked at and questioned. The snappy answer is she did great. But my son, as well as my daughter, were still at home with her. I took one of my grandsons to England with me on my journey. But the rest of the family did remain there. We still had income from the print shop. We retained our print shop earnings for quite some time. So though we were apart, and Franklin would constantly write back and forth with Deborah, and also to his daughter, his Sally, who he adored. And it was always an anticipation. He always thought he would be home in a couple months. Just a couple months more, just a couple months more. And 10 years went by. 10 years went by. Never made it home to see her again.
Sent a lot of letters, I suspect.
Quite a few letters. Quite a few letters, yes. Yes?
When you lived in France,
How dare you?
who were the writers and luminaries that you would talk with?
Yes. So when I went to Paris, a difficult journey because John Adams came along about 8 months after I was there. A difficult journey because I was trying to convince a French king that he should give us money so we could overthrow a king. Eventually, the fact that it was a British king won the day for us, and we were able to get some help. While there, though, Rousseau and I were quite good friends, but I was closest to Voltaire, the wonderful playwright, and he was living in Paris. I was a Mason. I was a member of the Masonic order, had been from a very relatively young age here in America. And he had heard about Masonry, but didn't really know too much about it. And I actually got him to become a member of the Masonic lodges. And so we became quite literal brothers. We called each other brother at the time. So those were some of the luminaries that I was with. Yes?
I've heard that you were a bit of a ladies' man.
How dare you? I take that back from you. How dare you? I will say this about Benjamin Franklin in Paris, because we hear a lot about Benjamin Franklin in Paris. A few things. One is Benjamin Franklin loved his own press. We already know he would imitate other people. Some of the rumors he started himself. Absolutely. Secondly, they send one of the most stiffest human beings, proper human beings in the universe, to go and be with him in France in the form of John Adams. And John would look at the way Ben was living his sort of French life, and he was outraged. So a lot of rumors came from that. And thirdly, painters, hundreds of years after Franklin, 19th and 20th century painters, When they wanted to paint the great ladies of Paris, they would put Ben Franklin in the portraits. That they had met Benjamin Franklin. If you look at the clothing they're wearing alone, you know they're probably a good 100 years, 150 years after Ben Franklin was actually there. But all these very racy paintings only helped his rather notorious. Thank you. And the other thing was Ben Franklin was so smart. John Adams shows up, wakes up at 6 in the morning, is pounding on the gates of the royal court. He's trying to see people, visit people, and no one is seeing him. No one is seeing him because everyone is looking at how powerful England is, and the British ambassador is very well regarded in Paris. Very well regarded. Ben Franklin sees that, and Ben Franklin knows that in Paris one does not get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So he leisurely gets up at 10, and he goes out in his carriage and starts making casual social rounds with people that include parties late into the night. And that makes him look a very risque, dirty old man sort of character. He is actually a better diplomat than John Adams is because of the way things were working in France at the time. Other than that, yes, he was probably a little naughty, but only a little. Yes?
With the founding of the country, it was such a time of political ferment and so many possibilities that had opened up. What about the particular character of Ben Franklin in terms of what he was interested in, what his sense of career and talents and where they were within him made him go into the direction that he went into, rather than seek something different within that time of such a change?
His first trip to England, he is a Tory. I'm sorry, his second trip, when he is sent over as a representative of the colony, he's a Tory. He thinks that England should own the colonies and the colonies should be represented. But that time working with the British government and seeing what was going on, especially with King George, and the derision that was paid it. Franklin's quoted at one point as saying, never has such a wonderful possession been so rudely treated than these colonies by the British Crown. So being in the heart of things in London is when it grows in him that there has to be independence. They will never listen to us. And that really changes him. I get a question often about why wasn't Benjamin Franklin the first president? And Franklin hated being in the forefront. He would love to be in the pack, and he would love to influence things. But he didn't like to be standing out there sort of by himself. So when it comes time to found this nation, he's a part of every committee you can imagine. He is tremendously influencing the fact that we get the Declaration. And the same thing with the Constitution. We know about Alexander Hamilton. We love Alexander Hamilton. If you look at the portraits of the Constitutional Convention, Hamilton is sort of sitting and leaning in and gazing with absolute adoration at Ben Franklin. But Ben Franklin didn't like to take the point. He believed in this sort of communal existence. That was very important to him. So I hope that answers your question. Yes?
Where did poor Richard get the information that went into the almanac?
So we know that there were great scientists around. For Ben, it was a delightful hobby, and he was really good at it. But there were really good scientists around, and a lot of the information would be from the source, an original source, but then the next year people would borrow from the year before and just make slight adjustments. There was a lot of attention paid at that time to climate and how climate worked. And really good records following sunrises and sunsets, and those can be calculated fairly easily, I'm told, I don't do that, by good scientists. But he would utilize a lot of source information from other people to create his almanac. Yeah. Yes?
I'm not sure if Ben Franklin was credited with, I don't know if it was a quote or a statement, based on what you had just said with the monarch and how they treated, like, they mistreated the Irish and they lived in hovels that, you know, the observation was if we stay under the British rule, we'll end up like the Irish and other colonies, just
Yes.
making, was that Ben Franklin or was that Thomas Jefferson?
I think it was Tom Jefferson, but certainly Ben Franklin's sentiments.
They
Yeah.
agreed on that kind
Yeah,
of
absolutely,
observation then.
absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the major things that colonists would point to is look at the other possessions that
Right.
England has. How are people being treated
That's how we
there?
would end up.
Why are we surprised that we're treated any different? One more question. Yes?
Who were the men and women that Franklin most admired and respected?
So Voltaire was one of them when he was in France. They corresponded heavily. He loved John Adams as a tool, and I say that in the nicest way possible. John Adams was a little bit of a means to an end, but Ben Franklin could also directly talk to John Adams and tell him he was being foolish and a stick in the mud and those kinds of things. He thought Thomas Jefferson was a tremendous writer. The two of them had a fair amount of correspondence, but the information we have about them talking is tremendous. He and Alexander Hamilton as well. Hamilton just thought the world of Franklin. So those were among the people that he really admired at the time. So I had one question about my alter ego that I promised I would get to. So my actual name is J.T. Turner, and I developed this one-person show about Benjamin Franklin over a period of about, it's constantly evolving, but I would say 5 or 6 years it's been different and germinating, and then it sort of went into performance mode after that. I've been touring as Benjamin Franklin for over 12 years now, I guess. But those initial 6 years was a lot of stumbling and what works and what makes sense and how much to include, because there was so much to include. Ben's born in 1706 and dies in 1790. He literally watches the creation of the United States, and he was so involved in so many passions that the biggest problem in writing this was what to leave in and what to cut out. But you've been a great audience. I'm actually back here next Thursday as Robert Frost, the American poet. My hair is totally different. You won't even recognize me. Frost also has an amazing life story that most people don't really understand. We also get at least 2 of his poems almost 100% wrong, but you'll only find out if you come next week. Listen, thank you all very much.